Hey guys, it's me. I'm just putting together this little video, just as an example to show some little techniques here, about stippling. Just because what I found is that with a lot of my content, I'm getting a lot of comments about, people not having enough patience to do a technique such as stippling or dot work, or that a lot of people are coming through and wishing that they had the ability to do stippling. Generally speaking, stippling is actually not a hard technique to do. It's a little bit tricky to master, if I'm completely honest, because it does take a little bit of practice, especially with different levels of density and stuff like that, just being able to get that little bit of control. So I just put together this video just to show a little bit of a break into how to do it. So I've got a bunch of pens here. What I tend to use Stettler pens. So I apologise pronunciation. I'm very bad with pronunciation, if I'm completely honest. But they're pigment liners, and the reason why I tend to use these ones is because they do last long and they are also waterproof. So with my work, I tend to use different mediums. I tend to use a lot of watercolour, so it doesn't bleed, it doesn't smudge or anything like that, which is fantastic. You can use microns, uniballs, but generally speaking, you don't necessarily need to have a professional pen to actually do anything like this. You just need a solid pen, nothing that's a brush tip preferably, but generally speaking, any type of pen, as long as it makes a mark, you can usually stipple with. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a pen, just anything that makes a mark and that's hard, then you'll be able to do it. So my little guide is just basically going through the different ways of stippling, different pen sizes, because having a different pen size does make a difference. So if it's something that's a small nib, so I've got, for example, a 0.1, so if you look at the size nib of that, it's actually quite a small nib, and with that, you would tend to find that with a smaller nib, it commonly gets used for anything that's with a lot more detail, or anything that's quite fine, or little tricky areas, like really small little places. With this one, it's a 0.8, so it'll be a much thicker nib, and I tend to use these with much denser areas that need to be covered, or anything that's a much bigger image. So I tend not to use larger nibs personally, but if you find yourself doing anything that's an A3 size or anything that's way bigger, then the larger nibs do tend to help. So going through on the video, what I'm going to edit into here is my little time lapse of a little example of what I mean about the different size nibs, and just generally showing you how to go with, just basically just a little guide into the examples of what I mean by density and detail and everything like that. So I'm gonna throw this in here, Right, so what you just saw there was just a little time lapse into, of course, as I explained, the different thickness of the nibs make a huge difference. So yeah, what I put down here at the bottom, a good place to start is usually 1.1 or 0.3 nibs, just to try and get the hang of things. It tends to be easier just so you can see the difference in terms of what I mean by density and spread, of course, with the larger size nibs, and then less density and more detail with the smaller nib. It's a good place to start, and if you feel more comfortable with using a smaller nib, you can always change to a smaller nib, or if you feel more comfortable using a larger nib, you can also use a larger nib. So it's what you're really more comfortable with doing and how you make the images, basically. If you tend to do anything that's a lot darker or lighter, anything that's with more detail or less detail. So it's entirely up to you which way you want to go with that. Like I said, I personally go with much smaller nibs, so I tend not to use the larger nibs unless I essentially need them. So yeah, a couple of little techniques that I'd just like to throw out there as well is that a first thing that I like to do is, just an example, I'm going to use the larger nib to actually show what I mean. So here I got a nice, very badly drawn circle. And one thing that I tend to do, just to make things easier for when I draw, is I tend to, so to speak, break up the image. So as an example of this, I'm just going to do it in this little bit here. What I do is I do a little few dots just along here, and then I just start filling up just that little section that I've broken up. So it just helps make it more manageable and breaks it down into more comfortable sizes, rather than have like the whole picture and just this one massive area that you just need to stipple. You can just look at it and just think, okay, I'll have to do this bit first, and I can do this bit, then this bit, and just blend it all in together. It's a bit like if you were breaking down, if you, like, say for example, if you just breaking down pieces of a jigsaw puzzle just to try and work down the image a little bit. I know that's a terrible example, but you know what I mean, just making those little manageable sizes just to make things easier for you, and just piecing them together. Or if you're really bad with food, you can like break down the food and just make it more manageable sizes, because that's like a thing that kids do, isn't it? So it's just maintaining that little bit of control. So as you can see, it's starting to fill up a little bit just there. And there you go, so there's one section there, and then what I tend to do is I tend to work on the next section and just continue on there. So like I said, it just makes it much more easier and manageable, especially when you're doing it for the first time. It's just makes it less daunting, and it feels, personally, I feel like it does give you a sense of accomplishment, because then you think, right, I've got to get this bit done. Then you do the bit, and then it's like, oh yeah, I did that bit, right, next onto the next bit, and continue on from there. So little successes, but you can see what I mean. So just break it down and just make it easier for yourself, especially if you've got bigger images or bigger surface areas that you need to cover. You do have that. Another little technique that I like to use, I'm going to use a smaller pen for this one, so I'm going to use a 0.1. So, excuse me. So for this, what I tend to do is that for larger areas, so I'm going to, well, for thicker And well, especially when I'm using a smaller pen for thicker areas, what I tend to do is I tend to angle my pens in different ways, so that kind of gives you a little bit more control as well. So if I point straight down like that, it does give you the full surface area of the tip of the nib, and it gives you a little bit, well, ground to cover when you, especially when you're doing darker areas with a finer nib. Like that as an example. But then when I'm doing places, little bits that need less pressure, I tend to angle it more at an angle, so I'm using rather the side of the nib. So when I go in as such, it's also a good way of showing just how to space things out as well. When you're using lighter areas, you're giving that a little bit more control over the pressure when you're doing it at an angle. It's lighter and easier to manage. So yeah, so like I said, it does take a little bit of practice to try and get that level of control. It does take time, I will be honest, but it's not something that's impossible to do. It's not something that's completely something that it does take like years to manage or years to master or anything like that. It just takes a lot. It is time consuming, I will be honest, but it just means you just have to practice at it. Like, you don't really get anywhere unless you give it a try, and you just gotta go for it. Don't be scared of it. Just give it a try and just practice. That's all it is. But I hope this guide helps. I hope I haven't come across as too awkward doing this, because like I said, it's not often that I actually do videos like this, but I do hope it helps. And yeah, like I said, give it a try, see how it goes, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.